hand it over to this. They'll turn it on. It's on, but then they will kind of turn it.
Sorry?
Everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We will be starting a session shortly. I'm sure you're all excited to hear from our distinguished panelists. Today we have 4 sessions back-to-back, which will be covering the refugee higher education in the situations of conflicts and fragility. I will pass over to my colleague Manal to take us through the first session today. All the sessions will happen back-to-back, so I would really appreciate if you could stay once the first session is over so that we could transition to the next one. But yes, with further ado, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. This is such a friendly room. I think we know everyone here today. Come on in. Thank you for joining. Everybody, as always, thanks for the support. It's a little bit of a maze to get here, but we're really glad to have all the colleagues in the room. So it's my pleasure, as always, to be working with the colleagues on the stage. We all have various degrees and ways of working together, and so it'll be really interesting to see how they all knit together. We are here to talk about an interesting term. What Michaela and I were working together last year on a paper that highlighted an earlier piece of research that referred to the super disadvantage that refugee youth face in accessing higher education. And the premise of that, of course, is that young people universally face barriers to higher education, i.e. cost, mainly cost, but also, of course, achieving quality secondary education and being prepared, making transitions, etc. And yet there are specific barriers that refugees disproportionately run up against. And so those are going to be highlighted today, along with some of the solutions, both structural and also more innovative, individualized solutions for overcoming those barriers. So my job is just to keep the conversation flowing. And I would start out, for those of you who aren't intimately involved in refugee higher education, we know at this moment, our data tells us that there are roughly 5% of college-aged refugee youth who are enrolled in higher education. But that said, we're in the middle of our data collection exercise for last year, and so we do expect to see at least a 1 or 2% bump. So we're hoping to be able to report 6 or 7% in the coming several months, hopefully by June, July. That said, the population of displaced people, as we know, continues to grow. At this point, roughly 1% of humanity is displaced. It's more than 80 million people. A good chunk of them, so roughly 17%, are between the ages of 18 and 24. And as we know, I think that some of my colleagues will highlight, those age brackets in themselves are a barrier to some refugees, because becoming out of age, right? Completing secondary at a later age, being in a different age group than your peers who are normally accessing higher education, and including some of the age restrictions that are around scholarship programs, tend to elude and make ineligible some young people who have aged out. So that's just one of many barriers. At this point, I would like to turn to the panel, and I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves as they begin their intervention. So rather than spending our time doing a round of interventions. But I'll turn first to Michaela. So if you would introduce yourself, and then Michaela, if you could just reflect on the research that you conducted, and I think specifically some of the case studies. So, highlighting some of the barriers, but then also the really interesting or compelling findings that you saw in the case studies. So over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, well, that's great. So my name is Michaela Martin. I'm working at the International Institute for Educational Planning. It's a UNESCO institute. Main task is capacity development in educational planning and management. I'm a higher education specialist, so I have spent 30 years of my life researching, teaching and training in higher education governance. But so far I had never worked on refugees issues, but it was kind of coming up as a kind of stronger issue, with the different crises that we have experienced over the past years. So together with UNHCR, we ventured into a 6-country case study research, 6 countries with a relatively strong refugee population, and they are France, Germany, Norway, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Turkey. So we wanted to have countries from the north and from the south, and looking mainly into inclusive policies. What is there as inclusive policies? And also focusing actually on inclusive policies on refugees to host country higher education, because that's actually the segment beyond the scholarships and the online learning, international online learning that is available for refugees. This is where most refugees go, and I think this is where we have the potential actually to to welcome and to provide access to the greater numbers of youth refugees. So we were looking into these countries and conducting interviews with country representatives, really number one, to identify the main barriers. I think just very shortly, they are, of course, first of all, the scarcity of opportunities to complete secondary education. So we are losing many refugee youth in the course of secondary education, which they either not attend or not complete. And then there are host country restrictions, of course, to free movement if the refugees are placed in the camps. The major financial barriers. Many countries practice policies of specific fees for international students, and that is really a major barrier to access in host countries higher education. Informational barriers. Access to information about the provision of the higher education sector, and what is accessible under what conditions. That's another major obstacle. Language, major obstacle in general for international students, but I would say also to refugees. Missing credentials, I think we are going to hear about this. Psychosocial barriers, because there is, of course, experience of forced displacement, and often physical restrictions to move out of the camp, and constraints also to access the labor market. So all this culminates into what you said, Manal, super disadvantage, I think, where we can really conclude that refugees are facing. So when we did our analysis of inclusive policies, what did we find? So some countries practice a policy-based approach to refugees. So they stipulate, for instance, Ethiopia in its 2019 refugee law is granting refugees the right to education, including higher education, to the same level as nationals. So I think that is something which is really valuable. So policy is really important. Fees, at least allowing refugees to access higher education at the same fees as nationals. I think that is and fee exemptions. We have seen quite a number of examples of fee exemptions. Sometimes higher education is free, like in France and Germany, but there are administrative fees and there are also exemptions of these. I think what is really important is preparatory programs and structured preparatory programs. Preparatory programs, they exist, language courses and academic support courses, but we have seen examples of, for instance, a very good example from France, offering a diplôme universitaire. So it's a structured preparatory program specifically for refugees, and it is organized by universities working in a consortium. I found that was a really good example where universities were working together to design the curriculum for a structured preparatory program, and students granting refugees the opportunity actually to have also access to student status and all the benefits that go along with it. So just some highlights. So we have just fresh from the press, it really came out, I think, 2 days. This publication, and I have put some cards for you on the seats for you to access it if you want to know more. So I want to stop here and thank you for the opportunity, Manal.
Fantastic, thank you, Michaela. So I would like to turn now, Yves, to you. I think it's clear that, Yves, you can speak to some of the specific barriers that Michaela mentioned, not least the language issue and the credentials issue, as well as any other that you would like to highlight in terms of your experience of moving into higher education from your lower levels of education. So over to you.
Yes, so my name is Yves Umuhoza. I'm a Burundian refugee, currently living in Zimbabwe. I'm also a recent university graduate from Chino University of Technology, where I was specializing in fuels and energy engineering. So some of the barriers that I would like to highlight would be the language barrier. So when I came to Zimbabwe, I was really very young at the age of 4. And so we had to move to stay in the transit center. And the transit center is located in Waterfalls in the capital, Harare. And so it has been really hard from primary education right through secondary in trying to adjust and to communicate with my other classmates who are locals. So I would like to say that language barrier is really something that affects the participation of an individual, especially for students. I think the language barrier is really something that is a hindrance, and it really needs to be addressed. And we have so many other refugees who are working towards facilitating some accelerated education, accelerated learning pathways for refugees by offering them English languages, which is very, very, very effective. And then, so when I was in high school, I went on to specialize in sciences, where I really got my interest in math, physics, chemistry. I performed really well. And then I had to transition from secondary into tertiary. That's where another challenge came up. I really faced difficulties in having the institution to understand my situation. They couldn't really contemplate on some of the documents that I had. So I had to seek for assistance from social welfare for them to intervene and to really come up with some documentation which I could present to them. So it is after that they had to accept me into the program, even though I had all the requirements. I met all the eligibility requirements for the program. So I think this is quite a big challenge, and I think it really needs to be addressed from the private sector, the governments, it's really an area which needs to be addressed. The recognition of qualifications is very paramount. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Eve. I think you've got a couple more minutes, so I would also ask then, in terms of, now that you have that qualification, what has your experience been in terms of being able to use it? I mean, being in fuels and energy engineering sounds like a high demand field. And so I'm wondering, was it possible for you to transition? Do you have a job? What's your experience in that respect? And I also just want to take the moment to say that Eve has been shortlisted now for a master's program here at U Barcelona. So we're waiting to hear for the final word on that. Back.
Thank you.
Back to you.
All right, so during my final year of studies, I managed to come up with an initiative, a refugee youth-led initiative that is mainly targeting on climate action. So I'm currently working as a project manager for Assorted Energies International, and our target is to address the deficiency in the electricity supply by addressing it through sustainable energy development. And currently we are working in Tongogara refugee camp, where we are really helping lives, transforming the energy crisis in the camp. So we did a number of donations. And also, apart from that, I'm also volunteering with UNHCR on some of the biogas digester project. And this really shows I guess, the uniqueness of the degree program. And also, just to add on that, I'm the first refugee to really graduate with that kind of a program in Zimbabwe. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Eve. So next, let's turn to Raul. I will allow you to obviously introduce yourself and tell us why you're on this particular panel. And if you could take then the opportunity to reflect on some of the literature review and research that you've been doing specifically on non-formal education and how that comes into the milieu of qualifications recognition. So over to you, Raul.
Thank you, Manal, very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm still finding my place in here, so this is a good question. Because, you know, I work for the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. It's another institute from UNESCO. It's not IIP. This is based in Hamburg, and it's very much focused on lifelong learning, adult education. And we have been working for the last years in the learning pathways, and particularly on the recognition of validation, accreditation of learning outcomes, mainly non-formal and informal way. When it comes to migrants, refugees, it's very important to recognize that they're facing a lot of challenges because their knowledge, their skills, their learning outcomes haven't been recognized in the new country, and that's it's very important process for the continue of their education, for the learning pathways, for career development. And of course, it's also related to visibility of their learning, to self-esteem, to motivation to continue the learning process. So it's quite relevant, the issue. The research for UIL was, I need to say, was more focused on recognition of RBA or recognition of prior learning, it's used to say in Europe. Not necessarily in higher education institutes, but in general in the different levels of education. However, we touch something on higher education. Some of the interesting examples we found in the literature review is, for example, one related more to recognition of prior learning to upper secondary school or to vocational training. And this was a quite interesting example, what is called Start Vienna Youth College in Austria. And it's very interesting. It's considering young migrants and refugees from 15 to 25. And they have the opportunity to be part of the Austrian education system. They go through the adult education center, and start with this clarification phase during the process of assessing their skills and competences. And when the learning outcome is recognized, they have a kind of education plan for the continuation of the process. So that's the level of upper secondary or vocational training. There is another interesting case that we found is more related to youth people for the world of work, and this was in Jordan. And it's together with the technical and vocational skills and the International Labor Organization, and ILO. And it's quite successful. They, for example, in 21, they already were able to recognize the knowledge of 16,000 Syrians and Jordans that benefit from this program. And of course, validates migrant and refugees' prior learning and grants them access to the labor market. Another example that I'm sure we'll have more of this in this debate is coming from Finland, and that's more related to higher education, that they assess skills and competences acquired by means of non-formal and informal learning for young migrants and refugees, and offer preparatory training to help them to enter the labor market or to continue in higher education. This is facilitated by CIME, which is supporting migrants in higher education. I think it's a very interesting case to follow. What are the main challenges, just very fast on this, that we found in the research that we are still conducting? I need to say, we don't have a nice publication as yours, but we will. One is the lack of integrated approach to RBA. Meaning RBA is not really developed strategically in consultation with the other partners. It has a lack of effective institutional coordination, not just because of the identification, documentation, assessment, certification process, but really because the national authorities, bodies are often disconnected from these processes. Several countries are currently implementing project-based RBA initiatives, but specifically for migrants and refugees, which is fine. However, while this represents a relatively promising picture, this is not sustainable. When it's finished, you cannot really make it sustainable. So that's quite an issue. Number two, there's a lack of access to the end user. Lack of awareness and information about RBA processes, lack of expertise of RBA, talking about portfolios, guidance, language and cultural barriers. I think that if clearly mentioned that, and it's clearly also seen in the research. Loss of qualification documents making it difficult to access. So I will say in conclusion, most of the countries, migrants and refugees are unable or unwilling to invest the necessary resources to the complex, lengthy, and expensive process still.
Thanks, Raul. I wanted to ask you a follow-up, if that's okay. On the example that you mentioned from Jordan, and I raise this because I'm sure that Ella wants to respond to this, the question of the end user. So when we say that this example, and I don't know the example, in Jordan is somewhat successful, does that mean, what does that mean? Does it mean it's producing some kind of a recognition, or it's the end product of a recognition process that then is meaningful to a potential employer and that they can understand then what these qualifications are? Or how is that working? Like, why does that qualify as a success?
Right. I don't know the exact detail, and I think this is very important. There's a recognition, I know that. The kind of risk with these kind of things is the level of acceptance to that recognition in the world of work. And of course, it's very much related to the assurance of the quality of the process. But in general, I mean, we have been checking, and I'm talking to ILO, it's quite well accepted until now. So I mean, I think still, I don't, I cannot not assure really that that's the case, but of course, there's also always a risk on that. But seems to me that is working. But also it's true that when I meant this number of 16,000, it includes both Syrians and Jordan people. So it's not clearly the division of refugees on that.
Great. Thank you for that. If you could pass the mic to Ella.
Of course.
So as I said, you'll see Ella is not listed in the program today, but over the past few days, we've been hearing her continually bringing up the issue of quality. And so we wanted to bring Ella onto the panel to talk about this issue of how quality plays into the myriad higher education offerings that are available to refugees, and what is worthwhile. She's been working in this field for many years, and so Ella, if you could comment, I think that you have both a specific country view but also a global view because you've worked in so many places on the quality issue and what your approach is. And I think specifically speaking to what Raul said about whether or not qualifications are accepted in national contexts where individuals may find themselves. So over to you, Ella.
Thank you so much, Manal. So it's a pleasure to be here and talking a lot on quality. So I'm going, first of all, my name is Ella, as Manal introduced, and I'm working with Kepler College, and we are based in Rwanda, but we also expanded in Ethiopia. And my role at Kepler is a preparatory program manager. I've been working a lot on preparatory programs, on how we can prepare refugees and least served communities from the host community as well. So we have student refugees in our programs, and we also have host communities that are from vulnerable communities. And we've been supporting all the students to make sure that they are eligible and they are fulfilling all the requirements needed for them to go for university accredited programs. So I'm going to talk a lot on quality, as mentioned. I want us to redefine our definition on what is progress. It's really good that we've been able to reach 5% of refugees in higher education, but I'm here to question what is going to happen after graduation. How are we preparing our students to make sure that they are ready for the opportunity outside of university? In my work, we started the preparatory program to prepare students to come at Kepler, but we saw that there were a huge number of refugees who wanted to go for higher education, and we couldn't get all the refugees at Kepler only, and we wanted to see how we can help other institutions accredited in Rwanda on how they can accept refugees. It was very helpful then because they didn't know where to start and how to reach refugees, and even refugees, it was very helpful for them to access information. They highlighted a lot of barriers, such as language barrier, access to information. How can I apply if I'm a refugee? Where do I access all those information? They lack guidance. My colleague, me and Sadiki, we've been coming up with different pilots, such as refugee guidance counselor, people who are there in all the institutions supporting refugees before university, during university, and even after, because they need to be competitive outside, because we have the policies written in the law, but how employers are embracing them is different. It's very different. How can we make sure that even employers are understanding the policy that we have? So I'm going to use an example on how refugees have been really doing well, because among the 700 students who were able to go in preparatory programs, 60% were able to go for university, and we have a couple of them who are now graduate, and they are now fully employed. They have decent work. So that's the reason why I want to emphasize on the outcome. It's good to talk about input and output, but what is the outcome on all the work that we are doing? We have a student who came, he was from a refugee camp, and then I talked to him. I was like, what do you want to do for university? And he talked, I want to be a business, I want to do business communication. Do you have an idea of programs that are available here in Rwanda? We have quite a big number of universities that could provide such type of degree. And I was like, go and list different universities that you know. And the student couldn't come up with any university. And I tried to get that student. There are those are the number of universities that are able to provide degree for you. So let's start. What are the requirements? And the student didn't have any certificate, but we started learning with different universities. there were a different program that could help that student to get accreditation for the document. So we had to go through all the requirements to help that student access document that could help him to access the opportunity. And in that transition, the student going to university, it was even hard because that student learned in French-speaking country, and coming in Rwanda, it was English. That student had to shift everything. So the student needed a preparatory program. So we have a preparatory program that student can spend more than 5 months while they're getting ready for university, while they're waiting others to join, so that we make sure that the student is very confident to start university with others. Those are different transitions that we can give to refugee students when we understand the whole context. They are able to study, but we need to understand what is the need and how can we fulfill the need and how can we make sure that those students are able to transition from the camp to university. And I'm going to talk about career development. We have different programs that are supporting students before 1 year before they go out of the school. So we kind of helping them to have a lot of internship, to have a lot of volunteering because they have barrier due to their status. So we need to make sure that they are competitive. When they are in an interview, they need to talk. They need to prove that they are able to do the work. So then when we are at the critical discussion, when we talk about documents, because a refugee, you are asked, do you have an ID? So the student will say that I have a refugee status, and the employer doesn't have any idea what is a refugee status. But if the employers is very interested in the student because they saw how the student performed, so it's our duty now to train students. How can you market yourself? How can you make sure that they understand? We always give them the UNHCR paper that shows you will have the right to work. In Rwanda, we have the right to work for refugees, but different employers, they are not aware of that. So we always make sure that the students have that document with them when they go for an interview. When they reach the critical discussion, they say, oh, this is a document approved by the government. I can testify that I'm allowed to work here. And then it's easier for the employers to start the discussion from there. Thank you so much. I will maybe continue the discussion on that.
Please. Thanks very much, Ella. And I think you've set a perfect stage then for Doug, for you to elaborate. So Ella has outlined what we know is often an ad hoc, student-driven, localized solution to a million overlapping problems. So now I'd like to turn to Doug for a state perspective on what does the big, right, bird's eye view from the state structural institutional perspective on how do we address this qualifications recognition issue, and why has your government been interested and invested in it? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. I'm Dag Hovdhaugen. I'm head of division for admission and recognitions in Norway and have been a part of NOKUT for several years. And NOKUT has been one of the organizations, Norwegian Accreditation Institution, and we have been very active on this field for many years. And coming from the government, the traditional logic of governments is that if you have your papers in order, you're okay. And the problem for refugees in this sense is that they don't have their papers in order. So you have to apply something else. And still, being a government, you can't rely on ad hoc solutions and try to bending things. You have to think on a systemic level, and you have to establish practices that are fair, that are equal, that are scalable, and that are in accordance with national law and international obligations. So we are very aware that we cannot solve all the problems and we cannot remove all the barriers, but you can sort of take one thing at a time and see, is it possible to remove or lower this barrier? And so for me, recognition and access are kind of the focal point. And the point is to try to put refugees in a situation where they go from having no papers to actually having something that has a value and that they can use, so that their sort of formal situation or their situation is formalized. So for more than 10 years, NOKUT has worked on a method for mapping qualifications of refugees or displaced people without papers. And there can be many reasons why you don't have your papers. Some people, they don't have them, and maybe their institutions from which they got their papers are not existent anymore. And not to say the least, many are at odds with the regime from which they fled. And of course, then you can't trust information coming from that country if we ask about qualifications. And I'm talking about formalizing qualifications, both for the labor market and for higher education. And I also then have to stress that there is a difference between the access part and the admissions part. In many jobs in Norway, you will be required to hold a master's degree, unless you can't apply, for example, for government. But it is the employer who decides whether he wants to hire you or not. That's something else. And you have the same thing when it comes to higher education, that we can do something to grant access. Whether they are admitted, then you see other barriers, language barriers, for example. There is no point in admitting somebody to a course in Norwegian if you only speak French or if you only speak another language. So those are other barriers. So what have we done? We started working on a methodology that involves interview-based mapping of a person's qualifications. And that it can be varied. You can do it on a deeper level and more extensive level, or on a more survey level, in a sense that we will have interviews, sometimes with experts, where we ask the person about his or her studies, background, what campus you went to, what kind of courses you took, some subject-specific things, and you try to map whether is it plausible that you actually have this degree or not. And to my experience, this is, you can never be 100% certain, but it is a method that we believe more and more in. And of course, most people are honest people, and most people are what they are, and what they need is to actually get acceptance for that. And so how do we transfer this to something more informal? In Norway, we do recognition, and you can get recognition through this interview-based learning. You can get recognition as holding a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, or getting access to higher education. But one of the things that will actually give this a lot more value if it's possible to do this on an international level, because people move. And if you could have something that you could use across borders and which is internationally accepted and which is scalable, then you have something that is of a lot more value than a certain document in a certain country. And so we have cooperated both with the Council of Europe, and of course this is not the Norwegian thing. We have had our part, but this is a collective effort. We also had a project, or we have a project with UNESCO, the UNESCO Qualification Passport for Refugees, which we have tried out through pilots in several countries now, Zambia, Iraq being two. And for the Council of Europe, you have the European Qualification Passport for Refugees, and they use the same methods. And so we are now, as I feel, we're sort of standing at the crossroads, because we know what we're doing. We have the tools. It is scalable. And at one point, we have to decide whether this is to be kind of an international undertaking, or whether we should go about it in our own separate countries and see what we can achieve. And I'm pretty certain in my recommendation, and that is that this is a good time to scale it up. It's a good time to increase cooperation internationally, and to build partnerships, and to build capacity, which is one of the main things that NOKUT does these days, because there are countries where this is done, and we are doing a lot of work reaching out and then trying to kind of help people get started. Because one thing that is important is that if you have an international system, you have to have some sort of quality assurance. You have to be able to keep the quality internationally, because if you don't, then the credibility of the papers that you get will not be sustainable over time. And I think this is something that will actually be able to remove one of the barriers when it comes to access, both to higher education and the labor market. And then admission and success and outcome are different things, but you can't solve everything at the time.
But we will try, right, Dag? Great. Thank you very much for that. So we've got a few more minutes, and I hope we can go into just a quick lightning round. And what I would invite each person to do is to surprise us or challenge us. So in your area of work or in your experience, what is the highest priority? What is the highest area of potential or example of possible potential to make change? What are new areas or next areas of research that are needed? And if everybody could just take 1 minute. Raul, you are on the spot.
Thank you very much. Well, I will say I will highlight 4 aspects for improving the recognition, validation, accreditation of refugees, migrants. One is flexible models. Second one, to make it sustainable. The third one, to make it inclusive. And the fourth one, to be sensitive on the context. When it comes to flexible models, it's really being able to understand the legislative, administrative, financial flexibility to meet the needs. When it comes to sustainability, is what I said, not often short-sighted models, but really something more sustainable. And when it comes to inclusive, what the literature review shows us is that we need to tailor RBA to national context, to disseminate RBA related to information context sensitivity, integrating RBA into migration policies, and also integrating migrants and refugees as a target group for the RBA policies, because there are countries that have RBA, but not related to migrants. And the multi-stakeholder collaboration. And when it comes to be sensitive, I think it's important that we're developing guidelines and assessment matrix to try to respond to the needs of specific needs of refugees. So I think I will stay with these 4. Probably I will add now this quality assurance, which is quite strong, no? Reflected in the...
Fantastic. I hear quality coming through right across the row.
So
Yves, over to you. Your greatest need, your challenge, what do you put to the room?
All right, so one of the things that I would like to point out to emphasize is the first thing would be the need to really address the issue of internship opportunities. This is a challenge that is really being faced in Zimbabwe, where we have a scarcity of jobs. And as we look at it, we see that the refugees are mostly impacted when it comes to that issue. And also, the other thing would be transition to work. Transition to work. I think there is need to really address this issue by ensuring work placements after graduation, after refugees have really gone through their education pathways, and when they graduate, they have to be accessible to work. And also, besides the financial need, of course, we're looking at the high cost of education, which is really a stumbling block and is a major hindrance for so many refugees. And so for us to attain the 15% by 30, it really needs a collaborative effort from every actors within our societies, from the private sectors, governments, NGOs should really consider and play a part to reach the common goal. Thank you so much. And lastly, I think I would like to just thank the German government, the government of Zimbabwe, for their endless effort to really ensure the integration of refugee within the education sector and healthcare facilities. I think we should all play a part in really ensuring refugees. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Eve. Well done.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will be rather brief. The super disadvantage is accumulation of so many different aspects of disadvantage. And I think what is needed is really coordinated approaches, tackling the many different obstacles that refugees face in a coordinated manner. This accumulates down sometimes to very operational tools like information being available not only on access to higher education, but also other opportunities in society. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And I think it's something also that I would want to emphasize, which is the need to support higher education institutions in their way to receive and welcome and support refugees. So I think we need really an approach to the issue which goes beyond individual activities. I think we have a lot of these and there's a lot of goodwill, but we need also something, I think, better coordinated to have more impact for the good of the refugees.
So to conclude this discussion, I want to emphasize again on what the refugees are going to benefit from the program. So it's good that we are targeting 15% of refugees in 2030, but I really want to emphasize to focus on the quality of the program. We need to think of the numbers, yes, but we also need to reflect on what they're going to become after graduating from those programs. Yes, it's good what we're doing, and keep doing what you're doing, and keep receiving refugees, and keep being flexible in admission process, and we can have supportive program that can support all the refugees to be more competent. We've been doing the work, it's working, and are really encouraging everyone to do those pilots and to see how we can support everyone. Let's all focus on making sure that refugees after graduation, they're going to access opportunities, decent work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll also try to be brief.
To you.
Yes, I have two things that I would like the people to leave this with. And one is that we are, I think, now 4 countries short of putting the global convention into effect. We had a session on this yesterday, and I think one of the things I would argue is that we need to do that as soon as possible, because the Global Convention provides a global framework from which, under which these issues can be discussed, and how we better can develop networks and build not the least trust, but also capacity. So I would recommend for everybody to go back to their home countries and try to get them to adhere to the convention as soon as possible. And the second thing is that, as I said, UNESCO has the UNESCO passport for refugees, and we need more partners. We need to scale it up, and we need to actually put some force behind this, because I think we have the tools now, and this is a very good opportunity to scale it up and to actually do something with some of the barriers. So thank you.
Thank you all. It's been an honor to share the stage with you, and thanks to everyone for sticking with us. And I pass over to Arash.
Thank you so much, everyone. Please join me in giving a big applause to our panelists today. Please remain seated while we are transitioning to our next panelist. You've heard a lot about post-education, employment. The next panel is going to focus on capacity building for connected education, digital skills, but also from learning to earning, and how we can close the circle of knowledge gaining, but also employment. So I would like to welcome all our panelists on the stage, and I will pass it to my colleague Carrie, who will be moderating the session. We also have some virtual participation that are joining from around the world. So please, yes, I might actually stop and hand over to you.
So they're all on?
Yep, you can start with that.
Okay, sounds good. Hello, welcome, thank you. There? Ah, sorry, I'm getting yelled at. I was just following your cue. I didn't. Okay, thank you all for attending our session. My name is Dr. Carrie Bauer. I'm representing two different hats today, Arizona State University, Education for Humanity, and also CLCC, the Connected Learning in Crisis Consortium. And on the stage, I am joined by Dr. Samah, Jennifer, both from Education Above All in Qatar, and Miss Cindy Bonfini-Hatlas, who's my colleague at CLCC. And you cannot currently see them, but online we have three different people. We have Mr. Sukhaib and Ms. Zaina from UNHCR, and Dr. Noha from the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research in Jordan. So today, we're here because UNESCO has brought us together because they want us to build a roadmap, right, together, to work collectively to bring about a new era of higher education. And it's because we have to really understand and work together how we create this new normal since we've had this pandemic. And we are also, the people on the stage and those online, brought together by UNHCR with a similar objective to create inclusion. Because inclusivity is very important, as the last panel was talking about. So we want to, as part of these goals, we want to create practical models. So today we have two models that we're going to talk about that span the scope and the ecosystem of higher education to really find you poignant ways to be able to apply how we do things in higher education. And the particular focus will be on implementing a connected learning strategy in Jordan and an e-work skilling and employment program in Gaza, thus elaborating on an open knowledge product and providing unique evidence and approaches to higher education throughout the system. The session will also address how we can ensure that higher education maintains currency and relevance and facilitates economic empowerment, particularly to the most marginalized. So with that, I would like to hand it over to our panel to tell us a little bit about each one of the projects that they're working on. And we'll start online first. Zaina, if you could start us off, followed by Noah, and then from there we will go to Cindy, and then I'll hand it to the second project from there.
Sure, thank you very much, Carrie. Good morning, colleagues, and good afternoon for colleagues from around the world. Please, I'm Zaina Jadan, Education Officer from UNHCR. Please allow me to start by highlighting the importance of higher education as a critical link between learning to earning for UNHCR, allowing young people to succeed, and is also seen and perceived as a roadmap to sustainable future. Investment in higher education for refugees specifically does support strengthening national education systems in which refugees participate, and they also benefit of, it's definitely also a great benefit to host communities, to the students, and to the institutions, the national institutions per se. So this is very much well aligned with the principle of shared responsibility. UNHCR and partners are committed to achieving enrollment of 15% of young refugees, women and men, in higher education, meaning we're trying to reach the goal of 15 by 30. meaning achieving this 15% enrollment in 2030 will mean approximately engaging 500,000 young refugee women and men in higher education. And this is an absolute dramatic contrast to the situation nowadays, where almost 90,000 refugee learners known to be participating in higher education nowadays. Of course, the pandemic, COVID-19, added to the challenges to achieving the 2030, the 15 by 30 goal on the one hand. However, it did also open doors and opportunities on the other hand, where many countries in the world turned to digitally supported education. These huge, tremendous investments in digital education are definitely welcome, yet we need to focus on one essential fact, that refugees and other traditionally marginalized groups need to be taken into consideration. Again, focusing on inclusion. So refugees do face many challenges accessing higher education, whether in person or online. And the vast majority of refugees and vulnerable groups, marginalized vulnerable groups, whether refugees or in host communities as well, were left out during this digital transformation. And they were also digitally divided from their peers, from other youth in the region and globally. Hence, ensuring refugee and vulnerable groups' inclusion in digital education is essential. Taking inclusion of refugees as a principle, UNHCR Connected Learning Consortium, with great coordination with the Ministry of Higher Education in Jordan, has invested a lot in system strengthening in that regard since 2019 through policy engagement and technical assistance to support process of greater access to connected learning in tertiary education. Why? Many benefits, of course, as we all know. I would like just to give a few quick examples of these benefits. For example, employment rates of graduates can be very high. Immobile students can access higher education. Students can earn while learning, among many other benefits as well. I would like to conclude from my side here with two key potential messages. The first one is mainly highlighting that connected learning opportunities need to be designed with considerations for inclusion of refugees from the very beginning. The second point is highlighting the importance of sustainability and relevance are key factors in success of connected higher education initiatives. And this can also only be achieved with a broadened stakeholder engagement like government and private sector through linking education to jobs, going back to the learning to earning principle. Thank you very much, and that's all from my side for now. Over.
Thank you, Zaina. Dr. Noha?
Thank you, Dr. Kari. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for Web Conference for having us today. My name is Dr. Nawa Al-Hindawi. I'm the Director of Information Technology and E-Transformation at the Ministry of Higher Education in Jordan. As you know all, world and national institutions of higher education are facing several challenges as well as opportunities resulting from ongoing scientific and technological development. In addition to repeated closure affecting individuals and sectors alike due to the COVID-19 pandemic and other situations. In Jordan, the ministry has a vision to improve and utilize the quality of e-learning in the Jordanian higher education institution through a well-planned roadmap and standardized rules and framework. We believe as a ministry that in order to have and ensure a successful learning environment, we must prepare and maintain the component of e-learning environment, such as the technological infrastructure, as well as the skills needed for building online courses, including instructional design skills with high quality and with high level. Now, in Jordan, also as a ministry, we look to integrate higher education into the space of world of knowledge, enhancing the skills of universities in administrating and building online courses. And also, we aim to support inclusive lifelong learning. And also, we have a main goal also, it's a regional and global collaboration. We are, as a ministry, we have different partnerships with many NGOs and different ministries inside Jordan and outside Jordan to have our vision done and made. We have in Jordan also, which I lead also, the Open Education Resource Center, which is a part of the ministry, and it acts like umbrella for all education center at the higher education institution in Jordan. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you. I'll talk with you, Carrie.
Thank you, Dr. Noah. Cindy?
Hello, everyone. Is the mic on? Okay, great. As Zaina had said, that the work that we're doing in Jordan really is thinking about including the refugees from the very beginning of design instead of waiting until after and trying to integrate the refugee population. We know that over 80% of refugees are housed in developing countries. If we don't think a little differently, right now a lot of the models are either take the refugees out, give them scholarships, or bring programs in that may compete with national programs. But what about the nations themselves? Dr. Noah really made available to us the opportunity to work hand in hand. We're quite a team. The Connected Learning and Crisis Consortium consists of actors in this space who have expertise in online learning. Underneath the CLCC, we have a working group called Instructional Design in E-Learning, where several of us have come together to share our expertise. And with Dr. Noah and with Zaina, we work together to train in phase 1, 30 universities, around 50 faculty in instructional design techniques. That was held in 2019. And guess what happened in 2020? A pandemic. So in 2019, the policies for higher education, for online higher education in Jordan were really adverse policies in that you could get maybe 25% of your program actually accredited. With Dr. Noah's help and creating the educational action plans in 2021, there's now issued a royal decree that online and connected hybrid learning is possible within Jordan. And you can see them moving forward in embracing the entire ecosystem. In the second phase of the projects, the IDL, the Instructional Design and E-Learning group, combined with Jordanian instructors, and together we hosted over 100 faculty across Jordan from various institutions. It's a different playing field today than it was before. Remote emergency education is not quality online learning. We have to remember that. So the investments we make now are really not in technology, although it's important, but in how do we build quality learning experiences around the globe? How do we make sure that ecosystem that we have is strong, not just for the refugees, but also for the host communities that the refugees are in as well. So by building that ecosystem and strengthening that system, we really lift everyone up. And we really see education as that engine for prosperity. So as the panel before us was talking about lifelong learning and pathways, we see that with connected learning, we don't have the physical boundaries that we do when we are working within the spaces. So we're very happy to announce the third phase of the program, which will, working with Dr. Noah and with Zaina, we hope to launch a Jordanian degrees within the refugee camp environment. And that's a very exciting next step for us. So please join us on our journey as we move forward. And Jordan is just the start. We're working also in the UAE. We have a project that spans 9 universities.
Recording in progress.
And we're also working with Lebanon. So we're very excited to be here today.
Thank you, Zaina, Dr. Noha, and Cindy. So you've now heard from sort of one part of the spectrum and the ecosystem in higher education at a more governmental and larger institutions level. Now we want to show you a model at sort of the program level. So Dr. Samah.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much to my colleagues. I'm very honored to be part of this panel. Dr. Samah Qamar from Education Above All, a foundation based in Doha, Qatar, dedicated to integrating children and youth who are out of the schooling system into formalized, recognized, accredited schooling systems, both in the K-12 system as well as higher education within Qatar and abroad in developing countries. We've just heard about the importance of entrenching digital skills in higher education systems for the wider population, but in particular refugee groups. It is critical that these embedded digital skills also continue to be offered to refugee higher education graduates. So we have to be thinking about this along a continuum, not thinking that the be-all and end-all is that higher education credential, but what do we do to support refugees in economic empowerment beyond that diploma, beyond that credential? And to that, the model that we will be presenting is one that promotes that transition from school to work and promotes digital entrepreneurship. But first, let's briefly expand on what we mean by digital skills, because we know that we hear a lot about the digital revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, and digital skills. What do we exactly mean by that? We're talking about skills that are needed to use digital devices, computers, smartphones. We're talking about applications and softwares that expand well beyond the here and the local context that a refugee may be at, well beyond that into the virtual space. We're talking about accessing and managing information, communicating online, and also using transactions, being able to actually apply and use transactions for payments and so forth. Moving to digital entrepreneurship, we're talking about digital online ways of finding customers, clients, for entrepreneurial ventures. We're talking about digital ways of producing and delivering products and services. We're talking about digital platforms to market and deliver those services. So this is what we mean when we talk about including digital skills for refugee groups. Refugee groups often reside, as we know, in very bleak, isolated situations and contexts, and they're unable to attain complete social and economic integration. And part of the model that we'll be presenting in the next minute is talking about breaking down those walls so that we can provide access to refugees well beyond those very isolated contexts. So we have to look at integration, and my colleague, Dr. Carey, has talked about how important it is that we think about inclusion. We have to think about ways to open channels that will push beyond the structural and political boundaries to enable refugees to attain that economic empowerment. My colleague Jennifer, who is to my left, will speak to you about the program called the Apex eWork program and how it worked in Gaza. And we believe that this produces or showcases a model for other nations and other organizations to use. Later on, my colleague Suhaib will talk about how Education Above All's sister organization, Silitech, prioritizes digital skilling and digital entrepreneurship for marginalized youth and marginalized refugees. So over to you, Jennifer.
Hi there. I'm Jennifer Dwyer. I work at Education Above All, in particular Alpha Cora program, which is a scholarship program internationally. So the biggest thing that we know is that, like in Gaza, we decided to, I'm going to keep it very short at this point, but we knew that we were hoping that the blockade would finish and that we'd actually be able to utilize our labor market survey, that there would be jobs for them afterwards, but it didn't happen that way. So we started focusing on eWork. And the biggest thing is there's a lot of eWork programs that are going on, skilling programs, but for ours, it was basically for higher education graduates to, to bridge that gap. And that's the biggest problem. So it was a 3-month program. We started, I'm going to keep it short at this point, but 208 students where we taught them soft skills, coaching, mentoring, which is really important, business English, And then there was a hackathon that brought them down to 92 students. And the outcome was really phenomenal. It was like in 3 months, they had 834 jobs and earned over $99,000. And that's like a lot of money. So I was really excited for them. The thing is, because the biggest part for us in Alpha Cora, Education Above All, is that higher education is very important. It develops you as human beings. And when I asked a lot of the students, I said, who graduated, I said, could you have done this if you didn't have higher education? Like, no, couldn't have done it. You know, so that 1 in a million person who's able to like make millions on, or maybe not millions, on eWork platforms is not reality. So I think this program really represents, because even though 70% of the students in the people in Gaza are refugees, and we feel this program could really help our other scholarship students and anybody else in other situations where they can be able to be employed properly with where it leads to employment and prosperity and cohesion.
Suhaib? Oh, sorry. Mr. Suhaib?
Yes. Well, thank you, Kay. It's a pleasure to be and excited to be here today. Well, this is Faiba Khawalda, Planning and Research at Solitech from Doha, Qatar. Well, actually, I couldn't agree more with my esteemed co-panelist has shared on the importance of promoting digital skills through learning employment programs. And if we look at the transformation that labor markets are undergoing, we will notice that traditional jobs are being transformed by the digital entrepreneurship. We're increasingly seeing large companies contracting entrepreneurs across countries to perform their business processes and functions. Solitech believes that this digital transformation brings unforeseen opportunities to create hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of jobs directly or indirectly. Solitech is taking a full advantage of this evolution opportunities by reaching underprivileged youth and equip them with the necessary skills and resources to improve their livelihoods through digital capacity building that is linked to employment opportunities, and to make sure that are not left behind through this digital revolution. Well, since inception in 2008, Solitech and its partners have always explored and implemented innovative solutions toward tackling youth unemployment, aiming connecting 5 million youth people, including refugees, IDPs, and others living in conditions of fragility, to economic opportunities and career-building jobs. Through the eWork program that was highlighted today by my colleagues, for example, technology can be utilized to reach those in remote places and offers equal global opportunities. However, accessing and using digital tools is one thing. As Samah indicated earlier, it's crucial to empower the youth to face the challenges that lies in their competition with the global competencies. This requires a focused effort to provide the youth with a particular set of necessary technical and soft skills that would enable them to compete. Through such an effort, we will start to see country borders move towards becoming non-existent altogether when it comes to employment. In Yemen, for example, I will end up here. Solitech is working towards strengthening the provision of the fully digitalized financial and non-financial services to help young entrepreneurs to start and sustain their businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for sharing information about your projects and practical models and the role of digitization in inclusivity. Specifically, we've been talking about spectrums. So that inclusivity not only in the spectrum of higher education, whether it's government or training faculty and staff or on-the-ground programs, but also in the learner journey, from where they start to where they earn. So thank you for that. Now I want to ask some questions of you. I'll start with Cindy, Dr. Noah, and Zaina. How do you think, how can capacity building, policy reform, and upskilling ensure higher education remains relevant, particularly to the most marginalized, using the most recent trends and innovations from the digital revolution?
Noah, would you like to start?
Yes, yes, thank you. Thank you, Carrie. At the beginning, let me talk a brief about the higher institution in Jordan We have in Jordan around 74 universities and colleges with 10 public universities, 16 private universities, and 2 with a special status university, and we have 1 regional university and 45 community and technical colleges with around 345,000 students. In general, the learning in higher education institutions shouldn't be confined to traditional modes of delivery on campus and inside lectures hall, as the situation has been at most of our institutions. Rather, modern information technology tools should be employed to make available modes of learning, not confined to any place or time, but accessible to learner anytime, anywhere. As my colleague Cindy said before, the online education or learning or connected learning, it's not an optional now, it's a part of the educational process in Jordan and I think in all the world. Now, these tools would also enable higher education institutions to offer quality education to a larger number of learners, allowing them to make maximum use of information, revolution, learn for life, and find fulfilling job opportunities. Now, the situation in general in Jordan, like all, the lockdown started in March 2020. Before that time, the face-to-face was the primary basic education type in Jordan. After that, we moved to online, primarily the synchronous one. After that, we have a fully online learning, blended learning at face-to-face, what is called the hybrid or blended learning. Now, and as Cindy said, that we started before coronaviruses, working on empowering and upskilling the online on the e-learning skills in Jordan Higher Education Institution. In general, we have 3 stages for online development in Jordan. The first one started in 2015 when the Higher Education Institution was directed from the ministry and the Higher Council to introduce e-learning into their academic program, and as Cindy said, with no more than 25% of the program. Stage 2 is upgrading the technological infrastructure and tool to promote the use of Open Education Resource Center, OER, which is led by the center we have in the ministry, which I lead also. Now, we have the stage 3, which is after Corona, it's transition to digital education due to COVID-19 pandemic. That means that the ministry and the Higher Council of Education led the process of movement to online education and coronaviruses. We didn't leave the universities to work by themselves. We issued the guideline and the procedure for all university, and the Higher Council and the ministry formed 3 specialized committees to evaluate the experience of online learning in all Jordan higher education institutions, along with a SWOT analysis to what the current status and what we need. After that, there's a committee which formed in the ministry from experts in Jordan it's called an action plan for embedding online learning, the full and blended learning in higher education institution. Now, this plan actually has a main goal. This goal is embedding and institutionalizing online learning, both the fully online and the blended, within the higher education system and all higher education institutions in the country, for the purpose of improving the learning process, ensuring its quality. The quality is very important things. I think and I believe we have to concentrate as a world, not also just to go online directly. We have to study moving to online carefully and incrementally. And we believe that instructional design is very important issue that should be covered for all institutions before start going to or moving to fully online or blended learning. Now, allowing also for a leap forward in the higher education institution outcomes aligned with global development. Now, for following up the Jordanian University, as a ministry, we propose a timeline for the implementation of the plan, including initial orientation, follow-up, monitoring, and assessment, and a lot of procedure and steps. And the ministry, we, each semester, ask each higher education institution in Jordan to submit a plan and technological readiness report that include capacity building for teaching the staff that they do each university, as well as we don't forget the student at the same side. Not all students have or has the needed experience to deal with the online learning. There were also a capacity building done for the student as brochures and videos from the university. Now also, some good points also I would like to explain that the policies and rules were issued in the action plan or were in coordination with the Accreditation and the Quality Assurance Commission for Higher Education Institution in Jordan. These policies actually act as a repository of rules for the efficient and safe learning environment in Jordan. The ministry afterward launched several initiatives and held a series of training of workshops. As Cindy said, my colleague, it started before Corona. It's 2019 up to now. Over 12 workshops we did with collaboration with some NGOs and with UNHCR, the Connected Learning and the Crisis Consortium played a major role with us for capacity building to the staff of higher education institutions in order to support the development of the skills required for online learning. As I said, the workshop we had, it started from the basic of online learning up to the advanced instructional design, which is very important. Many guidelines and brochures were issued, and so it spread across the university to help the staff and all of them. Now, I don't want to take a lot of time, but in light of the aforementioned, the transition to online learning with high quality is really taken in Jordan as a pillar of higher education reform. What we are looking forward to have a solid online framework and the platform in Jordan that
Dr. Noah,
all people.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I just want to give Cindy or Zaina 1 minute.
I just finished. Thank you. I'm sorry.
No. I just want to say you only have about 1 minute because I do want to ask the other group another question, and we started a little late, so.
Sure. Go ahead, Dr. Noah. You want to make
I finished, Cindy, by the way. If Carrie just waited 3 seconds, I will finish. Thank you. The floor with you now.
Thanks, Dr. Noah. I think we can all pretty much say that the emphasis on what we're doing is on quality online learning and mapping to quality standards nationally and internationally, and most importantly, doing it from the beginning, from the design, not waiting until at the very end, and thinking really inclusively in terms of who are the learners. Who are the learners we're serving within whatever context we're in, and really imagining the ecosystem that they have to live and go beyond. The piano before us talks about going beyond just the learning cycle, but really integrating that into their lifelong learning path. Zaina, would you like to close this off?
With very, very brief key points, which I think are very important when we speak about sustainability and maintenance. I would like to focus again on burden sharing, responsibility sharing, because no one can do it on his or his own, whether government, stakeholders, NGOs, civil society. It needs this collaborative approach with relation to burden sharing to ensure that we are not leaving anyone behind, whether refugees or marginalized other vulnerable groups, as well as host communities as well. So there needs to be this new way of working, as we call it, and a lot of contributions between the humanitarian and development actors working together, ensuring that we are ensuring quality lifelong learning programs moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. That's a very good segue, talking about lifelong learning and the roadmap that we've been talking about. So my question to you all would be, what does this roadmap look like when it manifests itself in quality digital connected learning approaches and programs such as yours?
Okay, well, this is great what's happening in Jordan, because actually it gives us a larger pool to be able to help students to be able to get to earning. I want to start, there's so much information I want to say, but I want to start with just one example, and his name is Ahmed, and he's from Gaza. And he was graduated in, let's see, what was his, developing, sorry. Anyway, he graduated and he was unemployed for 2 years. And he applied for our eWork program. And he asked us, what's going to be different about this? Because I don't know if you guys know, but there's a lot of box ticking out there. I mean, there's just like, yeah, we did capacity building. Yeah, we did this. Yeah, we did this. Like, well, what did you do? Like, what, do they have jobs? You know, they're just happy, better than doing nothing, you know? Like, I mean, come on, like, give me something that is going to make a difference. And so he asked that hard question. And so after he went through the program, we asked him, what made this program different for you? Because he was one of the students, the beneficiaries, who actually, after 3 months of training, he made it to the 92, that he had 2 jobs, and he actually earned $5,000 on each job. And now he's running his own startup and has a whole team of employees to work. Because, you know, in digital working, you can't just be one person. You're not just a freelancer. You could be an amazing leader and a really good person, and you're going to be able to help bring up a lot of people in your community. So that made, you know, because we keep listening to them, because we got to make sure things are going right. So the one thing that started, the most important points are, is that this is not charity. And that's the number one thing, is if you think it is charity, then you're not going to run it right. It's highly competitive. We started with over 2,900 applications, and then they were filtered down to like 1,200. And then after a technical evaluation, it went to 400. And after interviewing, the 400 went to 200. And then 200 of the students got to have 20 hours worth of courses and learning different, and then they had a hackathon at the end. And then it was all day, really competitive, and it landed to 92 students. And those 92 students got, it was kind of like a tier program, you know? And so they got like 8-to-1 ratio, mentoring, coaching, everything it takes to make it work. It's just, because I look at it as kind of like that parable, like if you feed a man fish one day, and then if you teach him how to fish, he could feed himself. Now, I see it in the same way. You can give everybody a laptop, you can give everybody internet, you can show them, hey, make a profile on Upwork. But the reality is, you have one person who's making a lot of money, and you have thousands and hundreds of thousands of kids who are making nothing. And so what are we going to do to make a difference? And that's why this program really worked. But you know, people don't want to spend enough money because they see it as capacity building and ticking boxes. And that always worries me. And it basically costs $2,000 to $3,000 per student. But those now have broken the cycle of poverty. They're all either got jobs, either online. They found they were given remote work, permanent remote work. It's absolutely amazing. And so I really believe in, if you don't do it right, it's not going to work at all. But doing it right isn't enough. If you don't care, like honestly, like the way we had to vet our trainers and mentors, it was like, you know, we had students as part of the vetting process. Are you gonna, you know, do you like that person? Do you think they're gonna make a difference in the program? Because if you don't listen to them, they're not gonna do a good job. And the coolest part was that in order to even apply for this position, you've had to make it on eWork. Like you've had to make it online. You had to show an excellent profile and made a lot of money. And that's, you know, like walk the talk, right? You know, not just showing up because I'm a good trainer. How much time do I have? That's it? Okay.
Sorry.
Well, there's other things. Okay, careful selection. We don't evaluate, but on jobs earned, filtering process, and relevance to the global market. Those are my last things. Okay.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm just going to add a minute to say that if all of you are sitting here in the audience listening to this and you're thinking that in your own context there are a lot of constraints to facilitate employment and economic empowerment to refugees, there are no higher constraints than the context that this work operated in. We are talking about Gaza, the largest open-air prison in the world. We are talking about a population where 60% are under the age of 25, where unemployment is 55 to 60%, where the average time it is for a worker or an employee to get from point A to point B to be employed is approximately 4 to 6 hours because of the Israeli checkpoints. These are phenomenal constraints. We're also talking about significant financial constraints for how people get paid. And despite that, This program operated with funding from the UNDP and from the Qatar Fund for Development to facilitate this economic empowerment for refugees. So I think it's very important to listen to this model and know that it can happen. It can happen with determination, with care, with believing that it can actually come to fruition. And because of this program, one of the primary benefits is the gender divide between those who work and don't work, so males versus females, was also overcome, because we're talking about females who can work from home, caring for their children as they freelance and are part of the gig economy and part of digital entrepreneurship. So Jennifer mentioned ticking off the boxes. This ticked off the boxes for all the right reasons. We're talking about graduates who now have profiles up on platforms such as Upwork, Mustaqil, and otherwise, like the top sort of online entrepreneurship freelancing sites, and they're earning money. So this can be replicated, and we'd be happy to answer questions that you have following this session. Over to you, Suhaib, for last words on what Silatech is doing for digital entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Yep, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Samah. Thank you, Kay and Jennifer. Well, actually, stories like the Jennifer already shared with us, it's like always our motive to keep working innovative and partnering with others to find solutions. And it's true that Silatech and Education overall recognize that the building the digital skills of youth requires holistic and practical approaches that can reach across sectors and engaging marginalized youth and refugees, identifying solutions to the challenges that they are facing, starting from learning to earning. Through the eWork program, particularly digital entrepreneurship component, we bridge the education to employment, and it comes as a response to the national and international digital labor market needs. This project and other similar projects that Silatech does focus on the set of functional competencies required. It could be, for example, on how to operate a device or interact with a platform to perform a task. And this requires an intensive particular training, as indicated by my colleagues. On the other hand, prior to their graduation, elaborate technical and soft skills are also needed to support them in attracting and sustaining income-generating opportunities. As you all may know, the Palestinian economy is small, restricted, and non-diverse, which has limited labor-intensive industries as unable to absorb many new entrants. Therefore, such programs are important to allow youth virtually across the borders of Palestine and compete with others globally. This, however, requires a contribution, and particularly from all stakeholders at the policy level, and the government bears a unique responsibility. And thanks to Mr. Nuh confirming that by showing what the ministry in Jordan are doing. For example, the other recommendation for the government could be mainstreaming the digital skills and essential skills as well in public education, or maybe permanently lifting the ban on the voice over internet protocol, which is like WhatsApp, Skype, and Zoom, or maybe expanding the investing in vocational training and centers and any other responsibilities. I know that we're running out of the time, but last but not least, I will end up with this. As for development organization like Silatech and the international community at large, we're inviting you all to explore the potential impacts that we can create together when we expand supporting for digital skills development programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. I know we are at the end of time. I have just two things I want to say. The first is the key takeaway today is that we must think inclusively in higher education, in both the parts of the ecosystem of higher education as well as the learner journey, and keep those together. And then the second thing is I would ask something of all of you to really think about what your role or your institution's role is in promoting inclusivity and in what spaces you can do that. And then, of course, I would invite you to talk to us and learn from our models and work with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really amazing. I mean, it's also really wonderful to have virtual participation. So I really appreciate all the time that you all had. You can actually see us. You can see the rooms. We are really excited to hear from all of you. So thank you again. We are transitioning to our next session while we're waiting for our panelists to come on stage. probably 3 highlights of the previous session that we could say was, 1, I think, increasing access to technical and vocational trainings across your country, the quality of the programs that you run to really help young refugees access to employment. I think the third part that was quite interesting was really about most of the refugees that access to technology and gig economy, it's a male dominant. So we really need to ensure that females, but also young girls, have access, and we facilitate that access to connected education. Our next session will be led by Rebecca Granato. I would like to invite all the panelists on the stage. This would focus on the benefits, the barriers, and the success of transition program for post-secondary education for refugees. Okay, great. Perfect. So we can have 10 minutes actually to transition to the next.